the paradigm. But I think a lot of people are realizing that a lot of services are being paid through Medicaid, and it's through interactions with CMHS that we can bring about some change. As a matter of fact, CMHS did have some systems change grants that were available, and this came out maybe months ago, in which they are trying to do more with this concept of self-directed care. The problem is that the audiences that are involved in this movement include people mostly from the developmental disability side and not from the mental health side. And what I'm trying to do in my small micro way is to suggest that we can learn something from the DD side in terms of framing our arguments not as entitlements or as rights, but in terms of framing them as supports that are necessary to live a full community life.
You've partly spoken to my question as you talk about self-determination and make it understandable as an idea that reaches so many issues. Knowing you work for the federal government, well, two questions. First, how to get the consumer survivor movement more engaged with this idea, and secondly, how to get the federal government funders more engaged with funding this approach.
Well, I think that there are ways in which consumers can be engaged in policymaking and design, and that's by taking advantage even of institutions that appear to be weak in terms of planning councils, which are grounded in law. I mean, these are grounded in our legal system to promote and to advocate for improvements in the mental health system. So what I would like to do, and one of the things that we're doing at CMHS, a partner of mine and a colleague, is trying to energize, if you will, or strengthen planning councils to make them more of a player in mental health systems delivery.
Hi. I don't know if I'm entitled to a question or not, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I think several of us who've gotten up there today have spoken about the importance of people being on the inside, people being on the outside, and how both of those efforts are necessary. And I'm real glad to hear the kinds of things that you're saying, and hope that you have that you're being heard loud and clear within CMHS. And referring to a comment you just made of one or two questions back, that the problem is that a lot of these efforts are directed towards DD and toward physical disabilities. One of the things I get real frustrated about with CMHS, that I hope you will be a voice in trying to change, is their insistence on kind of going it alone, that mental health is somehow always different. You and I were both just at a conference earlier this week run by CMHS on employment. Next week, I don't know if you're going to be there, there's a conference in Washington on disability generally in employment. And it seems like CMHS always has to have like their own little thing instead of working together with everyone else. And we do get, because of that, I think we get left out a lot. If the self-determination ethic went across all disabilities and all the federal agencies involved in disability were on board, I think it would be going a lot better. And similarly with a lot of other efforts that, like MICASA. MICASA, as currently written, I don't think would affect very many people with psychiatric disabilities, primarily people with physical disabilities. MICASA is a bill that would redirect federal funding from institutional-based care to individually community-based care. So I think it's real important, and I hope you're going to be a voice within CMHS to get them on board in these broad-based disability efforts towards self-determination and not always be putting mental health out there somewhere else.
I agree. 100%.
Well, I'm glad you're in there then, and I hope you're listened to by the powers that be within the agency.
Thanks, Judy.
I want to thank everybody who pointed out the need to integrate the consumer movement into broader programs. I want to thank you for your expression that we need to economically integrate people into the system. I read a book with a great title. The title of the book is by the author of The Truly Disadvantaged, William Julius Wilson. And this book, the title is When Work Disappears. And his thesis, his suggestion at the end is that if we are going to integrate people economically into this economy, we are going to have to put in some conscious effort towards job creation. And I also feel that as a mentally ill person, yes, I can get out there, I can do something productive, but not unless I'm shielded from certain tensions that are out there in the workplace. Give me a special set of people and an understanding, and I think I can be very productive. Is our job programs being considered? Are they a part of anybody's agenda? Because I don't think, as he says, when work disappears, that the economy left to itself will generate the jobs that we need for the truly disadvantaged.
You raise a very good point, and I like to use the term, I don't use the term work because I think, not because I don't like work, but I do. I think it builds self-esteem and all the other good stuff. But I think that we should talk in terms of income generation, and that kind of like makes a shift in how we think about work. We think about work as going to a place for a certain amount of time and creating so many units of production. But maybe that's a paradigm that won't be very profitable to us. So I like to think in terms of income generation, and under this type of theory, we can think about micro businesses, micro business enterprises that consumers can develop and direct, and making linkages with small business administration, using existing structures to build a more harmonious and just society.
I do believe there is this miseducation, not only towards the consumers, but also the providers. Sometimes we have to define who are the perpetrators, and are the perpetrators are actually our helpers, or they are just miseducated. The educational system in social service creates a lot of professionals as years to come, and they're the one who's going to provide services to the consumers in the future. My experience, where I came from, there's a lot of miseducation of Filipinos, of how they define their destiny. There's this question of self-determination. What's self-determination? What do we do? I always see that we need to do some re-education, and re-education is not only towards the mass base, but also the people who are sympathetic, the people who listens and hear us and help us. And I think if we need to produce more sympathetic counselors and helpers and providers, we need to change something in the educational system.
I happen to agree with you. I'm a product of some form of miseducation myself. And I tell you, it took me a lot to unlearn what I had to learn to get to this point. So I think your point is well taken.
I think lots of us are products of miseducation. I wanted to go back to the gentleman who spoke about work, because I think that I like your idea about income generation, but I think we have to think of this as vocation from a holistic standpoint, that people need to have a vocation. And that vocation has to be something that they self-define. What we have to do is help them achieve that vocation. And it has to be meaningful for each one of us, and it has to be beyond this ridiculous idea that people who have mental illness can only do minimal wage jobs. I mean, yes, there was a time in my life when I could only work a few hours, and some of you all know me from then, when I could only work a few hours a week. That did not mean that I had to clean toilets, which there's nothing wrong with, or work in a fast food place, which would have probably put me back in the hospital, or that I could have no dream beyond that. We have to change the way we view this. And people have to believe, we have to believe, and people have to believe that we can all achieve more.
I want to comment just on your point a little bit, Carol, and say that I really do believe that we all have aspirations. And I can tell you sometimes when I told people that I wanted to work at a certain level, the comment was, oh, how grandiloquent, or did they use grandiose? I mean, so there has to be a type of a psychology of expectation that we have to cultivate, and I think that you're making a very good point about that. Thank you very much.